This is The Recap, a weekly reflection on the sermons of Fellowship Baptist Church in Mainville, Ohio, seeking to help you make Jesus essential in every aspect of your life. I'm your host, Ryan Land, and I'm here with the preacher of this week's sermon, Brent Wilson. Brent, welcome back.
Good to be back.
It's Election Day, Brent.
Da-da-da-da.
It's like Superman or something. I don't know. Anything? You got any special Election Day traditions?
I don't.
Me neither.
I got my sticker.
I know I got my sticker too. People can see that we voted. And so I was thinking of my icebreaker question, and I want to know what historical presidential election you would have most liked to watch the results roll in for.
Oh.
Like to experience, which presidential election in all of American history would you most like to experience?
Off the top of my head, I have two. One I was alive
Pick
for.
one.
Well,
I'm just kidding.
Well, I'm thinking, when I was alive, so I technically was around.
But you weren't aware.
I was, but the Bush Gore one with the hanging chads.
Mm-hmm.
Been fun to be more part of that one.
Mm-hmm.
But the one that is quite interesting to me would be Thomas Jefferson.
Bro.
Was that gonna be yours?
Yeah, 1800.
Yeah, just so it was a tie.
Jefferson and Adams.
They tie, and so then it goes to
the House of
the
Representatives.
House, and they
choose Jefferson. Only time it's ever happened.
Yep.
The former Secretary of Treasury got shot because of that that election. So, but be a pretty good one.
Now I know in the musical Hamilton is pretty influential in the decision, but I'm not sure historically if he was.
Yeah, me neither. He wasn't in the House or anything, so I don't know. But yeah, that's a pretty good
throw
one.
His weight behind Jefferson.
I think
his
so.
Political enemy.
I think so
Because he hated Aaron Burr so much.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's Burr and Jefferson and Adams. Yeah. And Burr gets second.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And becomes VP.
Yeah. For a little while.
The whole time.
Doesn't he, after he shoots Hamilton, does he not? He goes on the run, right?
No, I think he just was vice president.
But doesn't he try to start another country?
Eventually, he goes into the Louisiana Territory
and
declared himself the emperor of the Louisiana Territory, and then gets he I think he's like arrested for treason, maybe even.
But he never got in trouble for shooting Hamilton.
I don't think so. It was a duel. It was in New Jersey.
Everything's
legal in New Jersey. Well, enough American history.
Well, I'll just say, if you've not watched Hamilton, you should get on Disney Plus tonight. And for the sake of the election, you should watch Hamilton.
You should. It's probably better to watch and better for your soul than watching the election.
Now, tonight,
results.
We're talking about watching
The West Wing.
The West Wing season 6.
No, I was saying season 3.
Season 3?
The re-election.
The
re-election.
Yeah.
But you could also watch season 6. 7.
The last season.
Yeah, you can also watch 7. But let's enough about the election. We don't need to. Everyone's talking about the election. We don't got to talk about the election.
We're going to talk about something else.
We're going to talk about the Sermon on the Mount. And we're going to talk about your sermon from Sunday about the wise and the foolish builder. And so this is almost a would you call this a parable at the end here? Yeah. Because it's a little bit of a story. It doesn't have much of a plot. You got 2 characters, and so this is really the end cap of the Sermon on the Mount. So before we kind of dive into the specifics of your sermon, any particular reason that you found in your studying, or that you think that Jesus decides to end this sort of more didactic teaching with a parable, like with a story?
No, not necessarily a particular reason. The big emphasis at the end of the sermon is it's both like these this triplet, these the warnings and sort of an invitation. And so, Jesus loves telling parables, and so, I guess that's the way he wanted to wrap it up.
Yeah. Well, I just find it interesting because the sermon, there's no other parable in the Sermon on the Mount, and then it just ends with a parable. So I thought that was interesting.
Good way to just sum it up.
Yeah, and I think
with a call to. Well, here's the interesting thing, I guess, about it is throughout the sermon there are tons of allusions and it's just kind of in the genre.
Allusions.
Ooh. with an A.
Allusions. Gotcha.
And it's just kind of in the theme of Proverbs and the wise man and the fool. And so it's really bringing it all to a head. And well, here's what the wise man does, and here's what the fool does.
Okay.
And this is how it ends in both situations. So heed these words.
Yeah. I like that. It's kind of like a bow, like really, really emphasizing sort of like the proverbial nature of the sermon. Yeah, that's interesting. I've never thought about that. Well, let's go through. Kind of what I want to do is go through one major point of your sermon, and then I kind of want to talk about this parable and how it relates to the whole of the Sermon on the Mount. We'll kind of do like rapid fire kind of recap. It's like a recap inside of a recap.
Oh man,
Recapception, directed by Chris Nolan, and just kind of see like maybe we can find some connective tissue, some ways that's all kind of fitting together, and specifically what it means to like be obedient to the whole of the Sermon on the Mount, because that's a lot of what this parable is about.
Yep.
And then talk a little bit about the storm that Jesus talks about in the parable. But first, this parable is clearly about foundation, right? The two contrary ideas is the house built on the rock and the house built on the sand. And you kind of gave this line: the foundation of life, the foundation of your life is whatever authority you rest in and build your life in. Unpack that a little bit for us, and then we'll kind of go into the four specifics that you gave.
So the attuned in listener would have realized or noticed maybe. I'm not expecting actually anyone to notice this, but when I preached,
I was pretty locked in.
When I preached, I don't know, a few months ago, this sermon on Christian worldview, used a very similar definition for a worldview. That it is that it's our final authority. It's our base assumptions about the world. And so just worldview, foundation, kind of the same thing, or kind of same starting place.
Yeah.
And so the foundation of one's life is that which they are seated upon. They're resting on. They lean on. They assume these things to be true, and assume that it's a final authority. And so we all have some sort of final authority, whether it's a rock or the sand or whatever it is. We have it, and it is conscious or unconscious. We may not have thought through what that thing is, but we have something that we are resting our life on, base assumptions. Yeah.
I think Keller even talks about it as the grid you sort of lay everything on, right? It's like the guidelines, the principles, everything, is going to fit in your categories.
Yeah, it's kind of like even more like the narrative I have made about my life in the world, how this fits into my narrative.
And so you talked about four foundations, principles, guidelines, grids, whatever we want to talk about it, worldviews that are, I wrote in my notes, sandy foundations.
Yeah.
They are not stable. And so I want to go through one of these particularly I think is really interesting, especially for our listeners, is the foundation of religion. And I think that was probably surprising for people to hear. I was like, wait, if that's a bad foundation, what are we all doing here?
Yeah.
So tell us why religion is a bad foundation.
Yeah. It's all in how you define religion, right? So obviously I'm defining religion negatively. One of the things that's interesting when we talk to lost people, a lot of times they'll say things like, organized religion is bad for the world, right? And religion seems to be, I quote Amos in the sermon, this going through the motions. People know that language, and so in Amos, these people, the children of Israel, they are singing in worship. They are making sacrifices to God. They're making offerings to God. They're doing all the festivals, all the rituals. They're doing everything by the book. And yet God is like, I'm stopping up my ears. I don't want to hear your singing. I don't want your sacrifice. They smell awful to me. I want nothing to do with all these things you're doing. Instead, I want righteousness and justice to flow like a river. And so like they weren't doing the things that God was really trying to get them to do. And so religion isn't the gospel, not trusting in Christ, in his penal substitutionary atonement, his resurrection, and his word. Religion is, I'm a good person. I believe in God. Um, I do the right things. I go to church. Um, I'm a moral, upright, good citizen. All those kinds of things. And Jesus really comes attacking a lot of that. Like he's attacking the scribes and Pharisees, who are these very religious people that are in the crowds. And he's called them hypocrites, right? He said that the things that they do don't match their hearts. Um, so he is getting after them. And so religion isn't the thing Jesus is doing. You know, it can be cheesy, but you know, we grew up with this language of
I already know what you're gonna say.
not religion, but relationship.
Yeah.
And I don't love that language, though we do have a relationship with God. Just a little hokey. But that Christ and his word and his authority are the foundation, not religious things. Because that religious things is really what I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, not the
it's almost like the goal of the foundation is the same, like honor God, reconciliation with God.
Yeah.
The road getting there is what differentiates it, right? Religion says, hey, you've got to be moral, you've got to do these religious practices, you've got to, you know, X, Y, Z. When Jesus is saying, actually, the only way to reconciliation with God is through me.
Now, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
I talked about Christless Christianity. Have you read that book? But you've heard that opening illustration. What are your thoughts about his take on if the devil had his way in the world?
Well, no, I think that's absolutely true. I think the hardest people, there's a great book, Dean and Sarah, The Unsaved Christian, right? It's like the hardest people to reach with the gospel are people that think they already believe it.
Oh yeah.
You know, and so getting through to people who think they're God honoring, think they're like, there's a reason the Pharisees were not coming to Jesus in droves, and all these people that were far from God or far from Yahweh were coming, right? Like, there's a reason for that. It's because the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the religious leaders, they thought they knew the way. And it's easier to convince someone of something than to both convince someone out of something and then into a different thing.
Yeah. Which is kind of what Jesus is trying to do with the Pharisees.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah,
and the whole Sermon on the Mount a little bit is about like, hey, all the things you think you're doing to honor God are actually just honoring to yourself. Yeah. And that's going to end up falling apart. Like, that's the foundation of sand.
So this is a little tangential, but interesting, particularly because it's election day in America and all these things. So the foundation of religion is something we've had in our country for a long time. We've called it cultural Christianity. And cultural Christianity meant if you wanted to be a politician, you had to be a member of a church, right? And you had to look the part and look Christian.
Not from a legal status, but from a social status. There was a social hierarchy, and Christians were on top of the social hierarchy.
Right, and you wouldn't get elected if that wasn't the case.
Or a small business owner, right? Yeah. If you were a business owner and people figured out you didn't go to church on Sundays, you were a social pariah if you did not have Christianity.
Right, and that is gone. And for I think you would say for the good, because while
for the good of people's souls, I think.
Yeah. Maybe not necessarily for society in some ways. The moral decay of society is certainly not good for that. But it is good in the sense that we had a lot of people who thought they were Christians because they were Americans, and Americans go to church, and really they had a foundation of religion, not a foundation of a relationship with the authority of Christ. And so I think that's interesting.
Well, yeah, and it's one thing that sets the past 50 years, 70 years of American history apart from all of previous American history is that, in the early day before, like pre-America, and then into like the 1800s is like people were 1800s that trend starts to become apparent, sort of the cultural Christianity. You talked about Manifest Destiny being this culturally Christian, kind of Christian nationalist movement, which it was. But it's like before that, you had people who were Christians and they understood the gospel. They were deeply discipled. They were, and the reason that a lot of people were in America was because of their religious conviction, right?
Yeah.
They had to come from other countries where their religious convictions were not honored. And then we lost, we over time we lost that, and because it was so ingrained in our identity, it became an assumption, right? And I think this is related. I'm jumping a little bit here, but to the Sandy foundation of tradition, right? You know, that was one of them. You said it's like, well, it's just what we've always done.
Yeah.
Like what do you say? There's this say. Sometimes some people are sarcastic, and you say this thing like, we ain't seen that in.
Oh, it's from a movie, and I can't remember the movie, but it's a movie my wife loves. But it's like sarcasm. We haven't had that since '54, and even then, it wasn't appreciated.
Yeah. It's like this sense of like we haven't had that since '54 is like that's kind of the sense in which I think it's like this is like well that's always how it's been done since
my grandma
went to that church, and now my dad went to that church. Now I go to that church. You know, or you see the traditionalist foundation a lot in Catholic circles. People will say they're Catholic. And you say, when's the last time you went to mass? They're like, oh, I don't know, 15 years ago. You're like, what do you mean you're Catholic? Like, it's like
non-practicing.
It's like saying you're a member of the YMCA, and you're like, yeah, my thing expired in 1990. It's like, like you're not a member anymore. Right. Like I think they revoked it.
You're not on the roll.
Yeah. And so like there is this idea, but it's just like, oh, because your family has done it.
Oh yeah.
And you were born into it. It's like that's just who you are.
And this is fascinating. There are people in every church across the country, and the people at our church who would say, "Oh yeah, I'm a member of Fellowship Baptist Church," and I don't know who they are. They're actually not a member. Like we've removed them from the roll at some point, maybe even before I got here.
Yeah.
But they think they were a member at Fellowship, 30 years ago. They ain't been in 20, but. And they ain't been anywhere else, and they still think, "Oh yeah, I'm a member of Fellowship," and that's like, that makes them think they're a Christian because of that.
Yeah. And so like you look at the Pharisees, in this, and that's kind of their argument against Jesus, and they're like, but this is how it's always been, which is hilarious because Jesus, eternal, can be like, it's actually not.
Yeah,
like, I was actually there, and it wasn't.
And it was never supposed to be.
Yeah, and that's why going back to some of the previous sections of the Sermon on the Mount, that's why he says, you have heard it said. He's challenging their tradition.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing I think we need to be open to. And I think especially in Christian circles, we need to rely on tradition. We need to look to tradition. We need to honor tradition, but we can't be controlled by tradition. Yeah. Not to rag on Catholics anymore than I've already done, but it's like their belief system, like they hold the authority of Scripture and the authority of tradition equally, right? It's like the Bible says it, and we've always done it that way. Are equal arguments.
Yeah, some people do that like practically, but the Catholics do it intentionally.
Yeah.
Like they believe that.
Yeah. And so we don't want to do that, right? Like intrinsically, like or with like just assuming, right? It's like, well, that's how we've always done it, we've always had this program or that program, or we've always had this on the stage or that on the stage, and so not letting tradition that's not rooted in Scripture control like our lives or our expression of worship.
And I want to be gracious in this comment. But it is a little alarming to me when, someone says, well, I can't worship, or I can't go to church there, or it's just not, whatever phrase they use, if the church changes thing A.
Oh yeah.
Right. Whether that's the order of service or the aesthetic or whatever the program, we've always done X ministry here, and if we stop doing that, then I just can't. It's like, what do you mean? Like you're here to serve Jesus and love Jesus, and the church has changed over 2,000 years of how it does things, and we're always going to be changing. Unless we're changing something that's non-scriptural, that's different. But just like the classic example is the story from your home church about the eagle on the top of the American flag that was turned sideways.
This woman couldn't sing; she was too distracted by the
I
fact
can't worship
that
with that eagle wrong.
the topper on the flag stand was facing the wrong direction. Like the flag was on the stage. The topper was facing the wrong direction, and she just could not focus on the risen Lord Jesus Christ because of the topper on the flag.
That's a problem.
That's traditional, yeah. And so I think the religion foundation and the traditional or the tradition foundation, those are, I think, can be the more challenging things.
They're hard to see.
Yeah, and especially if I want to be, you said you want to be gracious. I want to be gracious for older people, for older brothers and sisters, right? It's like because they were brought up in this cultural Christianity and because they've lived a lot of life and they have, good experience that they want to honor, but that the tradition thing is
and to be fair to them, the opposite extreme is not something I talked about, but for younger people, it's going to be more experience.
Well, yeah, so that's what I was about to move to. It's like this is the younger temptation for younger people and for everyone is the feelings.
Oh yeah, feelings, experience,
yeah. And so why are feelings a sandy foundation to build
on?
So
it's fascinating. I literally got a call this week from my sisters asking me about someone that they're close to who's having a hard time in church, and it's because they're like, I'm not getting that feeling that I've got in other places. I'm not feeling something, and feelings are so
fickle.
Yeah, they're so deceptive, and so manipulative, even in ourselves, how we can conjure up feelings and emotions and worship and think, oh, that worship service, which had that, this is how it connects to tradition, right? I remember that worship service where there was a choir or there was this song and I felt this way. Now I don't feel that way if we don't have the choir and we don't have that song. If we had the choir and that song back, I'd feel that way. Those tradition and emotion can also be connected there. But yeah, and so it's like, but even outside of the Christian context, like we have whole worldviews built on the subjective nature of feelings, whole philosophies. Postmodernism is the big umbrella term.
Yeah.
But yeah, whole ideologies based on, just look in the culture right now, how we're arguing about all sorts of morality issues. And it's not based on any sort of philosophy other than, well, I feel like that's bad. I feel like that's true. I feel like that's untrue.
Yeah.
I feel like a baby isn't worth value or life, and so we should abort it. Or I feel like love is love. You should be marry whoever you want to, or whatever the policy or whatever the thought is. It's based on my feelings and what feels right.
Yeah, and so it's like I think it's two things together, right? It's the feelings, the experience, but also the hyper individualism, right? And so those two things together essentially say, the right way to do things is the thing that makes me happiest in the moment, no matter what anyone else or any authority says.
Yeah.
Right? That's the worldview of postmodernism. And that's why you have transgenderism. That's why you have late term abortion. Why you have LGBTQ lifestyles. Right? It's because they're saying there's actually no authority that can tell me what's right, what's wrong, what's up, what's down. Only the thing that is true and the thing that is real is what makes me happiest in the moment. And if it doesn't make me happy, it's wrong. And if it does make me happy, it's right. And that's just not true.
Yeah.
And that's really like everyone's got to learn that.
And that's why I want to say everyone, because this can actually hit us a little bit too. And I'll just give an example. When you think about divorce, well, oftentimes it's, well, this is what's going to make me the most happy. Right? I love someone else, or I've fallen out of love, or whatever the case may be. It's not always the case, but it certainly can be. And so this isn't just a left problem.
Yeah, oh, for sure.
This is an everyone problem of we can really be slaves to what sounds right.
It's
and what feels right.
This is like getting a little bit philosophical, but this is what Charles Taylor would call secularism. And so he would say that secularism is not just the absence of religion, it's the elevation of other things to the level of religion, right? To the level of absolute truth. And so to say our feelings are absolute truth, well, that happens on the right and the left.
Yep.
And I think in our lives to think about the little ways that this is true. the way we spend our money, the way we spend our time is a lot of times guided by our feelings, not by a commitment to Christ as the firm foundation, right? Yeah. How we spend our mornings, our evenings, how we organize our schedule, right, with our kids' practices and our, it's like, it's our feelings that motivate those a lot of the time, not our commitment to Jesus. And so we got to really evaluate that both in just our everyday life, our family's priorities, because a lot of times we are just motivated by, well, this is going to make my kid happy. This is going to make me happy. Or this is, and so that's, well, they could wake up tomorrow and hate baseball. It's like, they may not, they may already hate baseball, who knows? Yeah. And so it's just, I think that this one is so prevalent in late 2024, it's like we're all guilty of this.
Yeah, and it's so deceptive and it hides itself. None of us feel like we're doing it.
Yeah.
I was watching a debate the other day, and this guy was openly holding this view. The guy that was challenging on him, obviously goes to the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah,
I can't remember what law that is, but it's like some law of the internet. It's like every debate will eventually go through the Holocaust.
But this guy, to his credit, was like, yeah, I have to be consistent. I can't say it was wrong.
Yeah.
He's like, I don't like it, but I can't say it was objectively morally wrong.
A consensus of the German population, right? Like elected Hitler and went along with the process, and it made them feel successful as a country. And
and what a horrible worldview to have.
Yeah.
It's like,
that says like,
that.
I can't, to be consistent with my own worldview, I can't say the Holocaust is wrong. Like
probably a bad
and you're not like, I'm going to rethink that. Like, you're like, that's just how it is.
Yeah.
Terrible.
And it really is the epitome of a naturalistic feelings based or whatever, philosophy.
Well, you mentioned naturalism. Let's go into the last, really it was the third one, but we'd already talked about tradition, was reason.
Yeah.
Right? The observable universe is the foundation on which I build my life. Why is that faulty?
And this one is, all of these things we're talking about are good things. Tradition is good.
Yeah.
Feelings are good.
Religion is good. Like religious practices are good, right?
Good.
A lot Christian religious practices, right?
Yeah.
Praying, the Lord's Supper, worship, those are all good things.
Yeah.
They're not ultimate things. I think it's okay to say that.
And so reason, I want to be clear, it comes from God.
Mm-hmm.
The laws of logic and reason and rational thought are an extension of the being of God. And so the reason we have them is because of him. And so these are good things. They just are not ultimate. And when they are divorced from a foundation that assumes or believes first that God exists, they go astray and they go awry. Science, for example, can never come to the conclusion that God did it. Because you can't test for it, you can't observe it. It literally, by definition, could never arrive at that conclusion. And so, like, why would we assume like that it could? Like, that doesn't make sense. And so, when I talked about Jurassic Park, it's like when you have rationalism as the base foundation without the assumption of God, it leads to human hubris. And we asked if we could do it, never asked if we were so should.
Busy, yeah.
Because
there's no moral guideline when it comes to reason.
Who cares?
Because it's not measurable. It's not testable. It's not observable.
Right.
Morality isn't right.
Yeah.
It's an supernatural, maybe too strong, but it's an ethereal reality that you can't see.
And so you can't even account for things like love. Doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's like there's actually no reason for so a mama bear and her baby bear, it's like comes up on some other predator. The mama bear is probably faster than the baby bear. And she could probably outrun and the predator just get the baby bear. And it's like, but what's the mama bear do?
Yeah.
She like steps in and takes on the predator. Well, it's like actually like that's not survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
It's like there are unexplainable realities, and we all know that. Like we all love people, we all want to have compassion on people, we all want to have empathy, but there's no observable reason why. And so, reason alone, naturalism, rationalism, can never account for community. It can never account for, like monogamous lifetime relationships. It can, the very structure, I think, of human civilization kind of fall apart if you just reject
and from
anything not observable.
From a philosophical perspective, people who are often find reason as their foundation, don't want to say, I got to have faith in something.
Mm-hmm.
They hate that, right? But to quote the great Albert Mohler from the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, he says, all final authorities at the end are circular.
Mm-hmm.
Every final authority, at the end of the day, you cannot prove it. You have to say, it says it's the final authority, and this is the best one that I think is the best one. I'm gonna believe it
because it is.
Yeah, whether that's science, whether that's God, whatever the case may be, you're saying that's the best. That's the best one I got.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think about this debate where there's this Christian and this atheist, and they're debating, and they're talking about evolution and the Big Bang and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy's making this point. He says to the atheist, he says, you have faith in science.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy's like, no, I don't. He's like, I have confidence in the science. I don't have faith in it. I don't have faith in anything. I have confidence in the science. And the guy says, no, you do. He's like, no, I have confidence. And he says, do you know what the word confidence means? He says, it comes from the Latin confide, meaning of or proceeding from faith. And it's like, you may have confidence in it, but really that's just another way of saying, I believe in this thing. And at the end of the day, we all do that.
Yeah.
And what we're saying is we think Christianity, Jesus, poses the best arguments, best reason, best tradition, best feelings, the best worldview, the best thing for human flourishing. It does the best on every possible category. So we are putting our faith in that thing, saying got the best answers.
Yeah.
So it's our starting place.
To your point about faith in science, it's like everyone has to have faith. Everyone that exists has to put their faith in the fact that there, at one point or another, there was nothing, and then there was something. Like that. Like I don't care how you explain how we went from nothing to something, but science has not explained how we went from nothing to something.
Yeah.
And it never can.
Never can.
It's because it can only look at what's achievable or observable, and so it cannot measure for nothing. And so everyone puts faith in something because at one point there was nothing, and now there's something, and that doesn't just happen.
It is the most bewildering thing to think that these people, that the cognitive dissonance to just, I don't know, and to be okay with that is wild to me, because it's like, sometimes they try to explain it and they go, well, these molecules and these molecules came together.
Where'd they come from?
Whoa. Where'd the where'd the molecules
there was zero.
Yeah. It goes against all of the laws of physics to think that these things came from nothing. Mass is neither created nor destroyed, all those things. And so it is, it's Romans 1 and 2, that we suppress the truth and unrighteousness.
Yep.
People know the truth, but they don't want it to be true because they don't want to be accountable to something. They don't want an authority over them. They want to be the final authority. And so I think that's the root of it.
And so I think one point you were just making is really helpful, is that, when you build your house on the firm foundation, right, on the teachings of Jesus, on the lordship of Jesus, is like these things actually like fall into their proper place.
Oh yeah.
Right. You can properly think with reasonableness. You can like Christianity is a reasonable religion, right? And you can properly order your desires and your feelings, and you can properly practice religious, what we would call religious rituals or sacraments or whatever, and you can honor tradition, right? And it's like, but when those things are not subservient to the teachings of Jesus,
that's absolutely it.
then they're unfulfilling. They're not going to last. Okay, so kind of the crux of this teaching of this parable is everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them. Or I like the translation that says who hears these words and puts them into practice.
What translation is that?
CSB maybe, I'm not sure. It was in a book. It was not. I didn't read it in the Bible. It was in a book I was reading, and so they quoted it in puts them into practice because it was talking to them about practices. Right? It's like this is not just like moralistic teaching. It's like, hey, go practice. Like the kingdom ethic, the life that Jesus has prescribed for you. And so what I want to do is, so you reference James, don't just be doers, or don't just be hearers of the word, be doers also. And so I want to just like quickly like run through some sections of the Sermon on the Mount, and I want you to just give me some thoughts on like, hey, how can we hear this and obey it? It's got to be quick. Okay. So like
lightning round.
The Beatitudes, right? Just some quick nuggets from the Beatitudes. How I know there's like how many of them? I can't
like
remember.
Or something.
It's like but some things from the Beatitudes. How can we hear that teaching and then put them into practice? So that we're like the wise man who builds his, because that's the key here is like he's not just saying, hey, put your faith in me and that's gonna keep the house up. Like that's true for salvation. I think he's talking about your life being built up here, your life flourishing. And so hear these things, put them into practice. We want to build our life upon the rock. We want to know how we can apply the Sermon on the Mount. So how can we apply and practice some of the Beatitudes?
Yeah.
That was stalling for you so you could have some more time to think.
Thanks. I'm trying to think about all the Beatitudes, what they are. I need a Bible in front of me. The first word, beatitude, or what they're called, comes from the Latin, which means blessed. And so really it's blessed is the man who, and so I think meditating on those is actually like reading them a lot, meditating on them. It's like, what does it mean to be meek?
Poor in spirit.
What is, yeah. One of the things we talked about when we did this the first time was how they're kind of like in order of like kind of like the progress of salvation. Remember that? And so it's like, these are things that should be true of every Christian. And so I just think spending it, and those are less, there's some action attached to some of those, but a little bit less action and more like kind of internal introspective about some things. And so like spend some time meditating on those things and go, is that true of me? Am I poor in spirit? Am I meek? Am I whatever? I think start there.
Yeah. What about being salt and light? How do you think we take that and obey?
Yeah. And that's in connection with being the light of the world, right? And so the salt,
you're salt of the earth and the light of the world.
What struck me the most when I was studying for this was the idea of salt being this preserving agent, and then particularly connecting it with Hebrews, which connected it to Lot's wife, turned into a pillar of salt, who she is wanting to preserve something that God is telling her to turn away from. And so what are we preserving in the world that is good? We talk about cultural Christianity going away being a good thing. Well, the one place where it's not a good thing is the moral relativism that is plaguing our world right now. So it's like, hey, what are we preserving? What are we working the good in the world for? And how are we making things, salt enhances taste. And so how are we helping things to be better for society, for human flourishing? And light, how are we illuminating the goodness of the world? And so just like when you look at your life, are you making things better? Or are you making them worse?
One of the things I think you said this in your sermon, is like one of the goals of our church is that even people that don't go to our church, even people that don't like Christians, on an honest moment or during a crisis would be able to look at our church and say, I don't buy what they sell, but I'm glad they're here. Yeah. It's like that's to be salt and light. And so is that true for you? Is that true for your life?
Yeah.
That even people who don't like you, who believe differently than you, who dress differently than you, who who are totally different than you in every way, are they still saying, I'm glad when that person's around. I want that person to be around in a crisis.
Take a sort of Tim Kellerism. Do people around you go, I kind of wish what they said was true.
Yeah. I love it. I love that.
Like you live in such a way that people are like, man, I don't necessarily buy it, but
I wish it was.
I want to.
Yeah.
Convince me because I like the way you're living.
So this is gonna, that Jesus talks about the fulfillment of the law. Anything that you think we can take from there, but there's also like some specific laws he's going to address coming up. And so, do you think that's more like a header situation?
Certainly all connected. Jesus, is this where he says, "Hey, he doesn't come to abolish the law, but fulfill it"?
Yeah.
So, man, there's so much you can talk about there. It's like he's not come to. Gosh, where do I want to go? My immediate thought goes like all these Old Testament laws we don't use anymore. Like, well, he came to abolish those, and then actually no, those were more these civil laws for Israel that aren't true. So it's like we are supposed to, as we are being saved and sanctified, be a people who are embodying the law because the law is good.
Yeah.
Right. And the Ten Commandments are good. And Jesus sums it up like this later, right? All of the law and the prophets are summed up in this: love God with all your heart, full strength of mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. So if you're doing those things, you're fulfilling the law. If you're loving your neighbor as yourself, you're not going to murder him.
Yeah.
And so
you're not going to steal his donkey.
Yeah. And just to continue on down that passage, Jesus is getting at the heart, because this is where he's getting at the Pharisees for being hypocrites, right? Their external actions are good, but their heart's not aligned. It's like, hey, it's not enough just to not kill people. It's also murder in your heart if you hate them. And if you are so dehumanizing them that you are treating them in a way. And I'm just making this connection and something I was thinking about recently about how when we, Hyacinth from our church talked to me about this, about how there's an intentional use of language in our culture that makes things more palatable, right? So when you talk about the abortion issue, when you call it a fetus and not a baby, it dehumanizes.
When you call it it.
When you call it, did I call it it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you call them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when you do that, it dehumanizes it, so it's easier to justify abortion. And so like dehumanizing people in our minds leads us to that anger, leads us to murder in our heart. Like, so that's all connected. So it's God wants our external actions to be in compliance with his law, but he also wants our hearts to be in line with those things.
Yeah. I'm gonna jump a couple here and come back, but then he even kind of gives the reverse of that when he talks about secret righteousness, right? It's like I don't want your, like, you don't need to go be doing just all these actions just to show, but you need to be doing them with the proper motivation, right? And so again, it's not the internal and the negative aspect, like, hey, don't be angry, don't hate your brother in your heart, don't lust after a woman, like. Then he has these positives, like when you give, like have this motivation about you. When you pray, have this motivation. When you fast, have this motivation, right? And so it's all this correction of, you thought this was about action. You thought this was all about what you do, but it's also about desire. It's also about your will. It's also about your feelings. And so kind of both the negative of the internal life and the positive. And so one of I think the big header, like, or thesis statements of the Sermon on the Mount could be, it's like God is demanding your whole person, your external actions and your internal actions. Yeah. Anything else you could say about secret righteousness or laying up treasures in heaven, anything like that?
Oh yeah. Well, the whole laying up, it's like, hey, why are you laboring your time, your money, your energy for something that is so temporary? I think that I stole this illustration from somebody, but the idea of going into the motel or the hotel room that you're only going to live in for 2 weeks. It's like, I don't like this carpet. Let's rip up the carpet, put down a new carpet. Let's change the blinds. I'm gonna put a new TV in. It's like, that's nonsense.
Yeah.
Right. Because we're gonna live here for a week. But that's kind of when we think about we're gonna be alive for trillions and trillions and trillions of years. This 90-year life, 100-year life.
Yeah.
Why am I spending so much time investing in it?
Yeah. And that's related to the fasting, praying, giving. It's like, quit doing it for the applause of man that's going to run out.
Yeah.
Do it for the love
and it's
of your heavenly Father.
You were talking about, Jesus has been around for a while. He knows. It's like, this dude's got the perspective.
Yeah.
He's been around a while. He knows. He's like, I know it's like a parent telling a kid. It's like, what you're invested in is not worth it.
Yeah.
Trust me.
Let's jump back a little bit. What about, like, oaths, retaliation, and turn the other cheek,
Mhm.
and then also love your enemy. Like what obedience do we need to take from that to build our life upon the rock?
Yeah.
The firm foundation.
Loving your enemy is not, this might be opposite of what we've just said. We're probably better at loving our enemy, maybe internally. This can kind of go either way. I'm just thinking about, like, particularly on election day here, our political enemies, and how we may say, yeah, we want the best for political enemy. But externally, we're just running them down. We're posting about them. We're printing off pictures of them for target practice, whatever.
Yeah.
And so there's like an external action there that,
I do think
maybe internally we would say, yeah, I love them, but
I do think there's a sense in which, like maybe for like it's like, hey, I think actually politicians probably do this. It's like they actually just like know each other. And so it's like, hey, this guy's actually like not that bad of a dude, but we're running against each other in a campaign. So I've just like really got to run this dude down or whatever.
Yeah.
I do think there's maybe a sense in that sense, like that I don't really know this person, but just they're in the political party I don't like. So I've got to go torch them online. But I do think for the most part, our vitriol and the rancor that we have for people in opposite political parties is mostly motivated by our internal fear or
that's certainly
anger,
true.
or it's like I don't think it's ever like I actually kind of care for this person in my heart of hearts, but I'm gonna go put them on blast on Facebook or lie about them on whatever. It's like the reason we tear people down, and we're just using political enemies because it's election day. I think that could be true of anyone, right? Someone who's wronged you. The reason you go do that is because you're upset, you're mad, you're scared, you're frustrated, and so.
And to bring it into the realm of maybe an interpersonal relationship, a friend, a family member, whatever, that maybe they've wronged you, hurt you, and you're just inside fuming, but you never let you go and you pretend everything's fine.
Yeah.
It's like, that's not okay.
Yeah, that's not love.
Like, you need to go and bring that thing up and deal with it and seek reconciliation.
Yeah. I think that's great. What about this is a cold takes, no hot takes here.
Okay.
What about anxiety? Jesus says, "Don't be anxious." Any obedience from that we can take?
Yeah, don't be anxious. Did we talk about on the podcast whether like the whole week is anxiety a sin thing?
I think so.
Did we? Okay, I couldn't remember.
We were like, yeah, it definitely is. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
It's complicated.
It is complicated.
Jesus said, "Don't do it." So if, on the most basic level,
there's some other
is to not obey Jesus.
There's some other words that the Bible uses, not as like worry.
So how are we defining
concern?
Anxiety?
Yeah. But I think one of the things I took most from that kind of, we had a lot of people up here talking about it, and so and we had a lot of conversations about it at home, and it's just the not is the positive invitation from Jesus, is that like the how much more parable kind of there is like consider the birds and the lilies, like how much more does God care about you, and he's going to dress the flowers and give the birds a home. And so like less the negative, like don't be anxious, but more the positive of be at peace because the Lord is going to take care of you.
You don't have to be anxious because look.
Yeah. I think that's good. Judging others.
Yeah.
How does that relate? How does judging others relate to loving your enemies?
Yeah.
How do we because we want to be obedient to the whole thing, so how do we?
Yeah. Well, certainly when you are being, remember I talked about this, like being a judgmental person.
We all make we all make judgments. We all it's good to make certain judgments. Here's a piece of pizza that's got mold on it. Here's a fresh pizza. Yeah. Jesus is not saying, hey, you can't judge which one's better.
Yeah. But yeah, like to tear people down, to dehumanize them, to make them just the issue that they're struggling with or whatever, is not loving them, caring for them, serving for them.
Yeah.
Those things.
Well, I think particularly you think about the Pharisees running around telling everyone what they're doing wrong, while literally throwing parades when they go give someone like alms, right? They go like,
look at me.
Yeah. And they're like, you're not tithing enough. And then they go throw a parade for when they go tithe. It's like, take the plank out of your own eye. You know, that's, and before you go after that person, that's the log, sir. There's a literal log appeared on stage. So I think being honest with yourself about your own sin, being realistic about yourself with, looking in the mirror and saying, hey, there's stuff in my life, but then also being able to, it's not a total, do not go talk about someone else's sin to their face, but always do it with the knowledge that you're just as sinful, if not more sinful than them.
Yeah, and go with it with a goal of restoration and repentance. I want them to hear me.
Yeah.
There was that whole section in there about, don't throw your pearls before swine. It's like, don't throw the pearl is the gospel, right? From a later parable. Don't go in such a way that they can't hear you. The whole point is that people would hear you. It's like, hey, you're living in this sin. I want you to hear me because I want to save you out of it. I want to pull you out of this destructive lifestyle.
Yeah. It's almost like you've got limited ammo. Don't waste it all on.
Don't throw away your shot.
Don't throw it. I don't know if this is on camera or not, but
Hamilton.
And then lastly, this is what we talked about last week. The false teachers and the kind of works-based righteousness, like turn from me, I never knew you. What are some ways we can be obedient to those texts and build our lives?
Yeah. So there were three, right? So there was the gates.
Oh yeah, broad narrow gate.
Broad narrow gate, and then the false teacher, sheep and wolf and sheep clothing, and then the fruit and the true part, and then the I'm just trying to refresh my memory. And then the last
turn from me, I never knew you.
Yeah. I think the big takeaway from those three things is it's really a warning.
Jesus is winding down at this point, right? It's like this is the end of the sermon.
It's landing the plane.
Yeah.
This is kind of the warning invitation. And so it's like, hey, there are two paths. And there's a broad path and a narrow path. Pick one.
Yeah. You can almost see this as a continuation of that illustration. Like what we're talking about. It's like, hey, a lot of people are going to build their life on the sand.
Yeah.
Don't follow them.
Really, it could have been one sermon, like my sermon could have been one sermon of these four things.
Yeah.
It's just a lot to get to. But it's like, choose the path, choose your influences, what prophets you're going to listen to, like what influence you're going to listen to. Because, there are going to be people who say, hey, did I not do all these things? And Jesus is like, I didn't know you, right? Like, so if you're on the wrong path, like you can be religious and be on the wrong path and have the wrong influences and end up not being a true servant of the Lord.
Yeah.
And then culminating in, choose the wise path, which is to build your life on the word of Christ, not on the sand.
Well, man, there we go. Like a super speed through the Sermon on the Mount. I hope that was helpful. Just thinking about what are ways we can, find the part that you need to hone in on, right? It's like, hey, I really need to learn to be obedient in my anxiety or in my judgment of others or in my, putting my good works on display.
I would say a great practice would be to, just if you're not a Bible reader and you don't have like a good rhythm, like set out to over the course of the month, see how many times you could read through the Sermon on the Mount. You don't have to do it all in one sitting. Sit down and read a chapter a day and do it over and over again, and you'll be amazed at the depth of the sermon that comes out, and you learn it. So sometimes we want to read really broadly and not deeply, and so it's like just read it over and over again and become more rich.
And I mean, it's like we've done. You did a 40-minute sermon, then we do a 50-minute podcast on it. And we still just like scratch the surface of the depths of what Jesus is doing here. And so the last thing I want to get to is really just two questions. You mentioned. The parable mentions this. What is the ruin of the house on the sand is the storm. Which you equated to like hardship in life. And so you said this hardship will always expose the foundation of our life, right? And so and not in a pretty way, right? It's like the house on the sand gets destroyed, gets washed away because of the storm. And so really I just have two questions I think I want to help us think through is like, how do we determine what our foundation is before the storm comes, right? I don't want to wait for the storm to come and for my house to get knocked down. And then how do you prepare well for the coming storms? If you're confident you're built on the firm foundation? How do you prepare or practice for the storms that are inevitably coming?
I think I think I can answer them both maybe in the same answer.
Okay.
The way you both know you're on the right foundation, or the way you can know the best, and the way you prepare is by being in community. So if I am in a vacuum and I have believed a certain amount of things about the Bible, about God, but no one else knows what those things are, maybe right, maybe wrong. But if I have a community of people who are in touch with the Bible, in touch with church history, in touch with theology, and they hear my story, they hear the things I believe, and they hear my testimony, and they go, "You got it, dude. You've nailed it." And they're not like, well, no. They're like, "Man, that's it. Now I have confidence, right? In the things I've believed and trusted in are true, and we have done this together." So that's how you know. And then how do you prepare? It's like, well, I'm in community, and we're praying for one another, and we're studying the scriptures with one another, and this guy went through a storm, and we were with him through it, and I watched him walk through it, and I watched him wrestle and cling to Jesus. And then the storm came for some, and I've watched these other people do that. And then it came for me. Now I've seen an example, and I've seen how community rallies around you, and I've seen how they cling to Jesus, and now, I can do it too.
Yeah.
So I think the answer for both is community.
Yeah.
Biblical community.
Yeah, biblical community. Yeah, I think also partially just like you think about our core values kind of gets to this. It's like we want to be rooted in the gospel. It's like the gospel message is the firm foundation, right? And so the work of Jesus is the firm foundation. And so preaching the gospel to yourself every day, right? Understanding the gospel, knowing who you are, how sinful, how rebellious, how evil you are, and how holy and majestic and beautiful God is, and so how good He is to have saved you, right? And so it's like that is the foundation, because nothing can take that away.
Yeah.
And so when the storm comes, it's like Paul, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. I can be content, is what he's saying, because he knows the unmeasurable riches of knowing Christ. And so when you have that, it's like nothing can blow your house away, because the house is Jesus, right? Yeah. The rock was Christ, is what Paul says in 1 Corinthians.
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of wound down, and I kind of made all these little allusions, and I don't know if people picked up on them or not. But it's like you talk about Christ as the foundation, who the foundation of the world, right? Who was crucified, who was cracked. And the Psalms will talk about how we hide in the cleft of the rock, right? This crack in the rock from the storm. It's like, so he's the foundation who was cracked. And you think about the stone that Moses hit that was cracked,
living water,
drink living water from. And so it's fun how
the cornerstone of, you talk about community, right? It's like the cornerstone of the church, the cornerstone of community is Christ. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's just fun how all these like biblical imageries kind of come together.
Love that biblical theology. All right. Well, any final thoughts on the Sermon on the Mount, or on particularly this parable at the end of the Sermon on the Mount before we wrap up this season, this sermon series on
what do we say, season
4?
I guess we'll start season 5 soon.
I guess.
Well, I guess I'll plug our new sermon series.
I don't know that have we officially changed the title?
I think we decided on it.
Okay,
if not, well, then you get the wrong title, but you get the idea. So we're going to go through, we have 3 weeks before Christmas, so we're going to go through
3 weeks before Advent,
the Advent season.
Christmas is not that soon.
People are like, I got to go buy
some presents.
Yeah. So
I forgot to turn my shoebox in.
So 3 weeks in the Psalms, and I think we're going to call it the Songs of Longing. And so we're going to look at the Psalms and just this angst and longing from the Old Testament for promises to be fulfilled ultimately in Christ. But then we're going to connect that to our Advent series, and we're going to call it Songs of Joy. And we're going to look at, there's in the Gospel of Luke, the first 2 chapters, there are these kind of 4 songs or things that are kind of like song-like, these kind of
poems,
these prophetic kind of announcements that are songish. And so we're going to look at the Songs of Joy from the Christmas story. And love Jesus more through this.
Nice. All right. Well, Thanks for joining us for the recap. We hope this conversation has encouraged you to keep striving to make Jesus essential in every aspect of your life. If you aren't part of our church family, we'd love to meet you on a Sunday morning. We gather each Sunday at 10:30 a.m. For more information, you can always go to myfellowship.church. Thanks for listening. Be blessed.